5 years. It all started 5 years ago in the place where so many questionable dreams are born, our garage. I was 28 years old and my husband Leo was 30. He was already a senior project manager at a respectable firm called Stalwart Consulting Group. He had a clear career path, a 401k, and the kind of stability that our parents always told us was the key to a happy life. Me, I had an idea, and $50,000 in savings that I'd scraped together since college. I remember the exact moment I told him. The garage smelled of motor oil and old cardboard boxes. I just finished clearing out a corner, setting up a folding table with 2 monitors and a tangled mess of wires. It was my new headquarters. "Leo, come here a sec," I called out, my voice echoing a little in the concrete space. He walked in, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Even back then at 30, he had an air of settled maturity that made me feel even younger than my 28 years. He looked at my little setup, a small, confused smile on his face. "What's all this?" he asked, finally organizing the holiday decorations. I took a deep breath. This was it. No, this is my new office. I'm quitting my job. I'm starting my own company. The smile on Leo's face didn't vanish. It just changed. It went from amused confusion to something more like pity. He leaned against the door frame, crossing his arms. It was a posture I'd come to know well. His "I'm listening, but I've already made up my mind" pose. What, Jackson? You have a great job, good benefits. You're on track for a promotion." I know I said, trying to keep the excitement in my voice, but I have this idea for a logistics AI. It could revolutionize shipping and supply chain management. I've been working on the code in my spare time for months. It's real, Leo. It works. He let out a short, soft laugh. It wasn't mean, not exactly. It was worse. It was dismissive. A logistics AI, he repeated slowly, like he was tasting a strange new food. In the garage, honey people don't just start tech companies in their garage anymore. That's a story from the 90s. It's a good story because it works, I insisted. I've mapped it all out. I'm using my savings to get it off the ground. $50,000. That's our seed money. The number hung in the air between us. $50,000. I saw his expression tighten. That was real money. That was a down payment on a bigger house. That was a safety net. And I was about to set it on fire to chase a ghost in a machine. "You're going to burn through our savings for a hobby?" he asked, his voice losing its gentle edge. "It's not a hobby, Leo. It's a company. I'm calling it Etheric Solutions." Etheric Solutions. He said the name sounding ridiculous coming from his lips. "Look, Jackson, I love that you have passions. I do, but this is the real world. I work at Stalwart. I see what it takes to run a real business. It takes millions in capital. It takes a whole team. It takes more than a folding table next to the lawnmower." He walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. It was meant to be comforting, but it felt like an anchor. "Why don't you keep working on your project?" "On the weekends," he suggested. "Keep your stable job. Don't throw away everything we've built for a fantasy." Every word was a perfectly polished little stone, thrown with gentle precision to shatter my confidence. A project, a hobby, a fantasy. He didn't see a future. He saw a midlife crisis that had arrived a decade early. I looked at my 2 monitors at the lines of code I knew were brilliant, and then I looked at the man I loved, the man who was supposed to be my biggest supporter. And in his eyes, I saw nothing but doubt. That was 5 years ago. And for the next 1,825 days, that doubt was the background noise of my life. I fast forward 5 years to just 3 months ago. I was 33. Etheric Solutions was no longer in the garage. We had a proper office downtown with 30 employees, a wall of servers humming day and night, and a product that was genuinely changing the industry. The hobby had consumed my life. It was a blur of 100-hour work weeks, ramen, noodle dinners, and the constant gnawing fear of failure. Leo's doubt had been a powerful motivator. Every time he'd ask, "Is your little computer game making any money yet?" it just added another gallon of fuel to my fire. I came home one evening holding a bottle of champagne we'd been saving for a special occasion. Leo was on the couch, laptop open, looking stressed. He was 35 now, a little more gray at the temples, and the lines of frustration around his eyes were deeper. He glanced up. Rough day. I couldn't stop the grin from spreading across my face. The opposite. I came to get my biggest critic to celebrate with me. He closed his laptop, intrigued. Okay, I'll bite. What happened? I popped the cork. The sound was like a starting pistol. We just closed our Series B funding round, I said, pouring 2 glasses. The investors finished their due diligence. Etheric Solutions is now officially valued at $15 million. I handed him a glass. He took it, his eyes wide. $15 million. The number seemed to hang in the air just like that 50,000 had in the garage 5 years earlier, but this time it had a completely different weight. He stared at the bubbles in his glass. 15 million, he stammered. Wow, Jackson, wow, that's incredible. I guess your little project really took off. There it was again. Little project. Even with a valuation that could buy his entire company almost twice over, it was still just my little project. The praise felt hollow, like a line he knew he was supposed to say. He took a sip of champagne and the moment was over. His shoulders slumped and the stress flooded back into his face. That's great, honey, really? He said, his tone shifting completely. I wish I had something to celebrate. And just like that, the conversation was no longer about my success. It was about his misery. It's Marcus, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Marcus Thorne, my boss. The man is an absolute tyrant, a black hole of joy. I'd been hearing the name Marcus Thorne for years. Leo was a senior project manager at Stalwart Consulting Group, and Marcus was his direct superior, the director of operations. According to Leo, Marcus was a master of corporate sabotage. He'd belittle his team in public meetings, take credit for their successes, and assign blame for his own failures. What did he do this time, I asked, settling onto the couch next to him. My own monumental news was already a forgotten memory. The Apex Logistics proposal, Leo said, his voice laced with venom. I've been working on it for 6 months. My team and I pulled all-nighters. We built the models. We crunched every number. It was my baby. We presented it to the board this morning. And Marcus presented it, he said, his jaw tight. He stood up there and presented my work, my slides, my data, as if he'd done it all himself. He even took a question about a specific projection, a number I personally calculated at 3 a.m. on Tuesday, and answered it without even glancing at me. The board loved it. They were congratulating him. I listened to my own multi-million-dollar victory fizzling in my stomach. This was our routine. I would share a win, a new client, a successful beta test, a positive article in a trade magazine, and he would offer a polite, lukewarm acknowledgement before launching into a detailed account of his latest corporate battle at Stalwart. He took another larger gulp of champagne. This is why I always told you to be careful, he said, swirling the glass. He was connecting my world to his, but not in the way I wanted. You see how it is in the real corporate world. It's brutal. It's full of sharks like Marcus. Your thing is going well now, but it's still risky. It's not proven. A stable job, even with a monster, for a boss, at least it's stable. You get a paycheck every 2 weeks. You have a structure. He truly believed it. Even as he described the soul-crushing reality of his stable job, he was still holding it up as the responsible adult choice. He was miserable, but he was safely miserable. My success, my $15 million valuation, was still just a risky, unproven fluke in his eyes. It wasn't real, not like his paycheck from Stalwart. I just sat there and listened. I watched the anger and helplessness play across his face as he described Marcus Thorne in excruciating detail. The condescending tone Marcus used, the way he'd accidentally leave people off important emails, the way he'd call people out for tiny mistakes in front of the entire department. And as Leo talked, a strange calm settled over me. He was venting, releasing his frustration into the room. But I wasn't just absorbing it. I was analyzing it. I was processing data. He was describing a problem, a systemic weakness in an organization, a failure of leadership that was clearly affecting morale and I suspected productivity. He saw a monster he was powerless against. I saw a variable, an inefficiency, an obstacle that could be removed. My plan, which had been a vague, distant fantasy for a few months, began to crystallize. It started taking on sharp edges, clear steps, and a definite timeline. While my husband lamented the unfairness of his stable corporate world, I was quietly designing a hostile takeover. He thought he was just complaining about his boss. He had no idea he was giving me the blueprint I needed to burn that world to the ground. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of quiet tension. Our home, which once felt like a sanctuary, started to feel like two separate orbiting worlds that only occasionally intersected. My world was filled with hushed, late-night calls, with my CFO discreet meetings with corporate lawyers, and staring at stock market data for a company I was technically not supposed to be interested in. Leo's world was a slow, grinding descent into professional misery. The incident with the Apex Logistics proposal had left a scar. He became quieter, more withdrawn. The spark he used to have when he'd talk about a complex project was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. He would come home, drop his briefcase by the door with a heavy thud, and pour himself a drink without a word. The arrogance was gone. The condescending little speeches about stable jobs versus my hobby had vanished. In their place was something worse, a hollowed-out acceptance of his reality. He had been beaten down, and he was starting to believe he deserved it. He believed Marcus Thorne was the rule, not the exception. He believed that this was simply the price you paid for a corner office and a steady paycheck. I tried to talk to him to pull him out of it. I'd mentioned Etheric's new projects, the AI we were developing that was set to revolutionize supply chain management. I told him about the new office space we were leasing, a real headquarters, a far cry from the garage where it all started. I was trying to show him that there was another way, that the world wasn't just made up of stalwart consulting groups and men like Marcus Thorne. But it was like talking to a man behind a thick wall of glass. He'd nod, maybe offer a flat. "That's great, Jackson," but his eyes were distant. My success didn't inspire him anymore. I think it just made him feel worse about his own situation. It highlighted the cage he was in. He had spent 5 years telling me my path was foolish, and now he was trapped on his wise path while I was soaring. The cognitive dissonance was eating him alive. Then came the day it all broke. The trigger. The final push I didn't even know I was waiting for. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had just gotten off a 4-hour call with the team finalizing the offer price for the last block of shares we needed. It was a delicate dance, acquiring just enough to go unnoticed until the final decisive move. I was wired, my mind racing with numbers and legal jargon, but I was also buzzing with the thrill of it. The plan was working. It was real. The front door opened and closed with a sound so soft I almost missed it. There was no thud of the briefcase, no clink of a glass being pulled from the cabinet. Just silence. I walked out of my home office and found Leo standing in the entryway perfectly still. He was just standing there. His keys were still in his hand, his shoulders were slumped, and he was staring at the floor as if the pattern in the hardwood held the secrets to the universe. He looked utterly defeated. A man who had been hollowed out from the inside. "Leo," I said softly, "you okay?" He didn't look up for a long moment. When he finally did, his face was pale and his eyes were glassy. He looked right through me. "He did it again," he whispered. The words were so faint, they were barely more than a breath. "Marcus." He nodded slowly, a single jerky motion. He walked past me like a zombie and collapsed onto the living room sofa. He didn't even take his jacket off. He just sat there staring at the blank television screen. I sat down on the coffee table in front of him. What happened? What did he do? He took a deep, shuddering breath. The Apex deal. It closed today. The client signed. It's a 7-figure contract for Stalwart, the biggest one our department has landed all year. That's great news, isn't it? I asked, confused. That was your project. After he stole the presentation, they must know you were the one who did all the work. A sound escaped his lips. It was a bitter, choked laugh that had no humor in it. "Oh, they know," he said, finally looking at me. There was a terrifying emptiness in his eyes. "They all know." That was the point. He started talking, and the story spilled out of him in a torrent of pain and humiliation. The client had sent an email that morning officially accepting the proposal and signing the contract. They specifically mentioned how impressed they were with the detailed projections and innovative models, the very things Leo and his team had spent months building. It was a clear win for him. At noon, an emergency departmental meeting was called by Marcus. Everyone was there. The junior associates, the other project managers, even a vice president from another division who was visiting. The room was packed. Leo thought for one brief, shining moment that this was it. That Marcus, in front of everyone, was going to give him the credit he deserved. Public praise to make up for the private theft. Marcus started the meeting by announcing the successful closing of the Apex Logistics contract. The room burst into applause. Then Marcus smiled a wide, predatory grin and gestured for Leo to stand up. "And I want to give a special thank you," Marcus had said, his voice booming across the conference room, "to the man who made it all possible. Senior Project Manager, Leo Vance." Leo said his heart soared. He felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made him dizzy. He stood up, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through his weary exterior. But Marcus wasn't finished. Leo Marcus continued his smile, never wavering, was instrumental. In fact, his work was so detailed, so meticulous that he even caught a potentially catastrophic error in the final numbers just this morning. An error, I might add, that originated from his own team. The room went quiet. Leo's smile froze on his face. He had no idea what Marcus was talking about. There were no errors. Thankfully, Marcus went on raising his voice to project confidence and control. I was able to work with Leo to correct this oversight before the final contract was sent. It just goes to show you folks the importance of triple-checking your work. A single misplaced decimal point, a tiny flaw in the data, could have cost this company millions. But that's why we have oversight. That's why we have leadership, to catch those little mistakes before they become big problems. Let's have another round of applause for Leo for finding his mistake and having the courage to bring it to me to fix. The applause was scattered, confused. People were looking at Leo, their expressions a mixture of pity and secondhand embarrassment. He had been publicly praised and publicly executed in the same breath. Marcus had not only stolen his victory, he had poisoned it. He had reframed Leo's triumph as a near disaster that was only averted by his own brilliant leadership. He had made Leo look incompetent and foolish at the exact moment he should have been celebrated. Leo just stood there in the middle of the silent, awkward room, feeling the eyes of all his colleagues on him. He said he felt his blood run cold. He couldn't speak. He couldn't defend himself. To argue would be to call his director a liar in front of a VP. He was trapped. He just nodded, mumbled a thank you, and sat down. The meeting ended a few minutes later. No one would meet his eye as they filed out. He finished his story, his voice cracking on the last few words. He was looking at his hands, which were clenched into white-knuckled fists in his lap. He manufactured the error, Leo said, his voice now dangerously low. I checked the file history after the meeting. He accessed the master document last night at 11 p.m. from his home computer. He changed one number in one cell on one spreadsheet. Just one. Then he discovered it this morning and made himself the hero. I stared at him. The sheer calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. This wasn't just a toxic boss. This was a sociopath. A man who took pleasure in systematically dismantling another person's spirit for his own gain. Leo finally looked up from his hands, and I saw something I'd never seen in him before: complete and utter despair. The fight was gone. The cynical armor was gone. All that was left was the raw, open wound. "I can't do it anymore, Jackson," he choked out, and a single tear traced a path down his cheek. "I can't. 5 years. No, 7 years I've been at that company. I've given them everything. And for what? To be that man's punching bag, to have him tear me down piece by piece until there's nothing left." He shook his head, a look of profound self-loathing on his face. And the worst part is, He's right. I am a coward. I just stood there and took it. I let him do it. Because I'm so afraid of losing this stable job that I've let it destroy me. I hate him. I hate that place. He buried his face in his hands, his body trembling. Then he spoke the words that sealed Marcus Thorne's fate, the words that turned my business plan into a crusade. He looked at me, his eyes pleading as if I had a magic wand. I wish someone would just burn that place to the ground, he whispered, his voice hoarse with pain. Or buy it. Just buy the whole damn company and fire that monster. I just want him gone. He said it as a fantasy, a desperate, impossible wish from a man at the end of his rope. But for me, it wasn't a fantasy. It was the final shareholder resolution. It was the last piece of moral authorization I needed. All this time, I thought I was doing it for the business opportunity for the challenge. A part of me even thought I was doing it out of spite to prove to Leo how wrong he had been about me. But in that moment, looking at the broken man I loved, I realized the truth. I was doing it for him, to give him back the piece of his soul that Marcus Thorne had stolen. He couldn't see a way out, so I had built one for him. A cold, clear certainty washed over me. The time for planning was over. The time for quiet observation was over. I stood up. "I'll be right back," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the seismic shift that had just occurred within me. Leo didn't even look up, lost in his own private hell. I walked into my office and closed the door. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the head of my acquisition team, a shark of a financier I'd hired 3 months ago for this exact purpose. He answered on the first ring. "Jackson," he said. "Any news?" I looked through the door's glass pane at my husband crumpled on the sofa. I saw the ghost of the confident, ambitious man I married 6 years ago, and I felt a surge of protective fury so intense it almost took my breath away. He just gave me the final reason, I said into the phone, my voice low and devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a CEO giving an order, not a husband in turmoil. "The grace period is over. Execute the final share purchase. All of it. Pay what you have to. We're taking control." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Are you sure this will trigger the disclosure alarms? Once we cross the threshold, the board will know." "I'm sure," I said. "Send the wire. I want a controlling interest by morning." I hung up the phone. The die was cast. In a matter of hours, a holding company under my complete control, financed by the success of the garage hobby my husband had mocked for 5 years, would own 51% of Stalwart Consulting Group. I walked back into the living room. Leo was in the exact same position, staring into nothing. He was so lost in his misery, he hadn't even noticed I was gone. He had no idea that his desperate throwaway wish had just set in motion a multi-million-dollar corporate takeover. He had no idea that the monster in his life now had an expiration date. And he had no idea that the person who was about to save him was the one person he had never not, for one single second, believed in. The week that followed was the longest of my life. The acquisition was finalized within 24 hours of that phone call. Legally, it was done. A holding company entirely owned by Etheric Solutions now held a 51% controlling interest in Stalwart Consulting Group. But a legal fact and a public reality are two very different things. The information was locked down tight, known only to a tiny circle of lawyers, financiers, and the new board members I had already vetted and selected. The outgoing board knew a takeover had happened, but they didn't know by whom. Not yet. That was the ace up my sleeve for day 0. My life became a blur of clandestine activity. I'd kiss Leo good morning as he left for the job he hated, then immediately get on a secure video conference with my new board, mapping out the first 90 days of the transition. I spent hours on the phone with my legal team, rehearsing the exact corporate bylaws that gave me the authority to do what I was about to do. I was drafting press releases, reviewing employee files, and analyzing every single department budget of a company I had never set foot in. I was dismantling an old kingdom and building a new one, all from the spare bedroom I still called my home office. To Leo, it looked like I was falling apart. He'd come home from another soul-crushing day of being belittled by Marcus Thorne to find me hunched over my laptop, eyes bloodshot, muttering about dissolving resolutions and executive severance clauses. He saw the stress, the exhaustion, the secrecy, and he drew the only conclusion his worldview would allow. He assumed Etheric Solutions was failing. His mockery, once subtle and laced with passive aggression, became thick with a kind of pitying condescension. He saw my struggle as the inevitable, predictable end to my foolish dream. He thought he was watching 5 years of my life circle the drain, and a part of him felt validated. One evening, about 3 days before the takeover, he sat down next to me on the sofa, putting a hand on my shoulder. I flinched, my mind still deep in a document about Stalwart's pension liabilities. "Hey," he said softly, "you look terrible. Is everything okay with, the company?" I just nodded, unable to form a sentence that wasn't a lie. "It's a critical phase," I managed to say. He sighed, a long, weary sound of someone who believed they were about to be proven right. "Look, Jackson, there's no shame in it, Most startups don't make it. You gave it a good run for 5 years, a really good run. But it's a tough world out there." I just stared at him. He was trying to comfort the executioner, having mistaken him for a fellow inmate on death row. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. "Maybe it's time to think about the next step," he continued, his voice taking on the tone of a gentle guidance counselor. "My company is always hiring. It's a miserable place, but the paycheck is stable. It's a real job. We could finally have some security." Every word was a fresh stab of resentment. For 5 years, he had called my dream a hobby. He belittled my ambition. He scoffed at the $50,000 of my own savings I'd poured into it. And now, after I'd built a $15 million company from nothing, after I'd orchestrated a hostile takeover to save him from his own misery, he was offering me a job at the very company I now owned. He was offering me a cubicle in the prison he so desperately wanted to escape. I didn't say anything. I just stood up and went back to my office. I had to. If I had stayed there a second longer, I would have ruined the entire plan. I let his words hang in the air, a monument to how little he truly knew me. I let him believe he was right, because in 3 days the truth was going to hit him like a freight train. The morning of day 0 arrived. I put on my best suit, not the casual startup founder clothes Leo was used to, but a razor-sharp dark navy suit I'd had tailored for this specific occasion. Leo noticed immediately. He was fumbling with his own tie, looking rumpled and defeated before the day had even begun. "Wow," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Big meeting. Trying to get a last-minute investor to save the company." "Something like that," I said, my voice calm and even. I adjusted my cuffs in the mirror. For the first time in a week, I felt a profound sense of peace. The planning was done. It was time for the performance. We drove in separate cars. He left first, heading toward the building that housed his personal tormentor. I left 20 minutes later, heading for the exact same address. I walked into the lobby of Stalwart Consulting Group, a 25-year-old monument to corporate mediocrity. The air smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. And there, standing by the elevators, was Leo. He was talking to a colleague, but his shoulders were slumped, his posture radiating defeat. He saw me, and his expression shifted to pure confusion. He excused himself from his conversation and walked over to me, a look of genuine pity in his eyes. "Jackson, what on earth are you doing here?" He asked, his voice a low whisper, as if I were a family member showing up at his workplace to beg for money. Did you come here to apply for a job? Is that what the suit is for?" I looked at my husband of 6 years, the man I loved, the man who had never once believed in me, and I felt a final sad pang of disappointment before the CEO inside me took over completely. I simply met his gaze for a second, then looked straight past him and walked toward the executive elevator bank, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. "Jackson, where are you going?" he called after me, his voice a mix of confusion and alarm. "That's for the executive floor. You can't go up there." I didn't turn back. I swiped the temporary executive key card my team had arranged for me, and the elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the top floor of the boardroom. The last thing I saw before the doors closed was Leo's face frozen in utter bewilderment. Upstairs, the outgoing board was waiting. They looked like men preparing for their own funeral. I introduced myself, and my legal counsel presented the paperwork. It was a bloodless, efficient coup. As the representative of the new majority shareholder, I exercised my right to dismiss the current board. I then nominated my new board. They voted unanimously to appoint me the new chairman and chief executive officer of Stalwart Consulting Group. The whole process took less than 15 minutes. My first act as CEO was to instruct the head of HR to call an immediate all-hands mandatory company meeting in the main conference hall. 10 minutes later, I stood on a small podium looking out at the faces of my new employees. They were nervous, whispering amongst themselves. I spotted Leo in the middle of the crowd, looking pale and sick. Near the front, looking smug and utterly unconcerned, was Marcus Thorne. He was 48, with an arrogant sneer that seemed permanently etched on his face. He clearly saw this as just some boring corporate shakeup that didn't concern him. A nervous vice president I was keeping on for continuity purposes stepped up to the microphone. "Good morning, everyone," he stammered. "As you may have heard, there has been a significant change in ownership. A controlling interest in Stalwart Consulting Group has been acquired." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. "The new majority shareholder has appointed a new board," the VP continued, "and that board has acted swiftly to appoint a new leader to guide us into the future. It is my duty to introduce to you the new chairman of the board and chief executive officer, Mr. Jackson Myers." He gestured to me. I stepped forward to the microphone. A collective gasp went through the room. But I wasn't looking at the crowd. I was looking at two faces. First, Leo. His jaw was on the floor, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding, so profound it was almost comical. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. He shook his head slowly, as if trying to wake himself from a nightmare. Second, Marcus Thorne. His smug confidence had vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion and contempt. He looked me up and down, dismissing me as some tech bro kid who'd gotten lucky. He had no idea who I was or why I was there. He was about to find out. I leaned into the microphone. My voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent room with absolute authority. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Jackson Myers, and yes, as of about 20 minutes ago, I am the new CEO of this company. There will be many changes in the coming weeks. My vision is to revitalize this firm, to bring in new technology, and to reward the talent that has been overlooked for far too long." I paused, letting that sink in. Then I turned my head and looked directly at Marcus Thorne. Our eyes locked. His arrogance was returning, a defiant smirk playing on his lips. "But my first official act as CEO is a simple one," I said, my voice turning to ice. "It's a matter of house cleaning, Marcus Thorne." His name hung in the air. His smirk faltered. "Your employment with Stalwart Consulting Group is terminated. Effective immediately. Your network access has been revoked. Security is waiting by the door to escort you from the premises. Do not return to your desk. Your personal effects will be boxed up and mailed to you." The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Marcus Thorne's face went from smug to confused to white with rage. He opened his mouth to speak, but two uniformed security guards were already walking briskly toward him. He saw the look on my face, cold, final, and immovable, and his mouth snapped shut. He was utterly defeated. He was escorted out of the room, his face a thunderous mask of humiliation. As the door closed behind him, a strange thing happened. A few people started to clap, then a few more. Within seconds, the entire room, save for my frozen-in-shock husband, had erupted in relieved applause. I had just fired the company monster, and they were thanking me for it. I held up a hand for silence and gave a brief, confident speech about the future, about creating a workplace built on respect, not fear. My eyes scanned the crowd and met Leo's. The look on his face was one I will never forget. It was a cocktail of shock, shame, awe, and a terrifying, dawning comprehension of just how wrong he had been about everything. That evening, the silence in our home was deafening. Leo sat on the couch staring at the floor and hadn't said a word since I'd gotten home an hour earlier. I let him stew in it. I let him process the fact that the hobby he'd spent 5 years mocking had just become his employer, bought the company he worked for, and solved the single biggest problem in his professional life with a 5-sentence announcement. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a humility I had never seen before. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered. "Because you wouldn't have believed me," I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. "You've never believed in me. Not once. For 5 years, every success I had was a fluke. Every milestone was lucky. You told me to get a real job just this week, Leo, in the very company I was in the process of buying." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. He stood up and walked over to me, his face etched with a shame so deep it was painful to watch. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "Jackson, I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was arrogant and I was jealous and I was a fool. You were building an empire in our spare bedroom and I called it a hobby. You were changing our entire future and I was too blind and stuck in my own miserable little world to see it. I failed you. As a husband, as a partner. I failed. I am so sorry." It was the apology I had been waiting 5 years to hear. And in that moment, all the resentment, all the anger I had been holding on to just evaporated. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. I began integrating the advanced logistics AI from Etheric Solutions into Stalwart's outdated systems, immediately creating efficiencies that stunned the old guard. I promoted talented people who had been held down by Marcus's toxic regime. The entire culture of the company began to shift from one of fear to one of innovation and excitement. The power dynamic in our marriage shifted too. It wasn't about me holding anything over him. It was about the foundation of our relationship being rebuilt on a new solid ground of mutual respect. His condescension was gone, replaced by a profound and genuine awe. He saw me not just as his husband, but as a leader, a visionary. He started to thrive at work. Freed from the oppressive shadow of Marcus Thorne, Leo's passion for his job was reignited. He was a brilliant senior project manager, and he was finally in an environment that let him prove it. About a month after the takeover, I was sitting at the kitchen island late one night, sketching out a new strategic plan for the next quarter. Leo came and sat next to me, peering over my shoulder. 5 years ago, he would have made a snide comment about me playing business. Now he pointed to a section of my diagram. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "if we reroute the consulting workflow through this new AI module first, we could cut project onboarding time by 30%. It would free up my team to handle at least 2 more clients per quarter." I looked at him and then back at my notes. He was right. It was a brilliant idea. I smiled a real, genuine smile. I slid the notepad over to him. "Show me," I said. And he did. We sat there for hours, side by side, mapping out the future of the company he worked for and I owned. He wasn't just my husband anymore. He was my partner, my equal, in a way he never could have been before. He just needed me to buy his company and fire his boss for him to finally see it.